There comes a moment, quiet, often unnoticed, when a person who was once shattered stops trying to explain their pain and begins to rebuild. Not for validation, not to prove anything, but because something deeper inside refuses to stay broken. They thought you were finished. They looked at your silence and called it weakness. They saw your wounds and assumed you would never walk again, let alone rise. But what they failed to understand is that pain, when confronted with responsibility and truth, becomes fuel. It does not just pass, it transforms. You see, when people believe they've broken you, they expect compliance. They think you'll shrink, disappear, beg for approval. And for a time, maybe you did. But the real story begins after the fall, when no one is watching, when the choice is made to either decay or rebuild. This is not a story of revenge. This is the story of consequence. Because the very people who thought they had power over your downfall now stand powerless before your rise. And it's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not about vengeance. It's about truth catching up, the miscalculation of superficial judgment. People often make the mistake of believing that what they see is all there is. They look at someone going through pain, someone who's lost their spark, who's quiet, withdrawn, seemingly defeated, and they draw their conclusions as if that moment defines the person forever. It's a shallow instinct to judge someone at their lowest point and assume that the story ends there. But suffering is not a static state. It's a dynamic process, and those who think they've witnessed your collapse are often blind to the deeper layers unfolding beneath the surface. The truth is, when a person is broken, they don't disappear. They transform. But transformation doesn't look impressive at first. It's messy, it's silent, it's slow. There's nothing glamorous about rebuilding your spirit in solitude. There's nothing to perform. And that's where the miscalculation begins, because people who thrive on appearances are completely disarmed by the process of internal healing. They don't understand it, and so they mock it, dismiss it, or ignore it altogether. In their eyes, you were weak. In their eyes, you gave up. They saw you sitting in your silence and believed you had nothing left. They assumed your stillness meant defeat. But the truth is, you were in the deepest work of your life. You were confronting parts of yourself most people run from. You were holding your pain without projecting it. You were untangling trauma that was never yours to carry in the first place. And that kind of work doesn't look strong, not on the outside, but it is strong. In fact, it's the only kind of strength that lasts. They mistook your delay for denial, your reflection for regression. But what they didn't know was that you were recalibrating, you were learning, you were absorbing every lesson, every scar, every failure, not to wallow in them, but to convert them into something solid, something lasting. They thought you were stuck. You weren't. You were building the foundation beneath the surface so that when you did rise again, and you would, it wouldn't be temporary. It would be permanent. People who only understand power as domination will always underestimate the quiet kind. They believe control, noise, and force are the tools of strength. But real strength is the ability to endure pain without turning cruel. It's the discipline to hold your tongue when your heart wants to scream. It's the courage to face what broke you without letting it make you bitter. And that's what they couldn't see. That's what they never saw coming, because in their eyes you were broken. But in reality, you were becoming unbreakable. The power of responsibility and suffering. There is a fork in the road that every hurting person eventually faces. It doesn't come with signs or warnings, and no one can take the step for you. But when suffering knocks on your door, as it inevitably does, you're faced with a brutal choice. Will you carry it, or will you cast it on to others? Most people never pause long enough to see the choice. They react, they lash out, they blame, they find someone to punish, anyone but themselves, and call it justice. But you, somehow, did something different. You didn't pretend it didn't hurt. You didn't minimize what was done to you, but you also didn't make the pain your identity. You bore it, and more than that, you took responsibility for what the pain was shaping inside you. That's what separates people who remain broken from those who rebuild. Responsibility. Not guilt, not shame, not self-punishment. Responsibility. It's the decision to say, this suffering is now mine to carry, and I will choose what it makes of me. That isn't fair, it isn't easy, and it certainly isn't popular. But it is transformational, because when you take responsibility for your pain, you take back the power to define your future. You become the author again. And let's be honest, it would have been easier to stay bitter. It would have been simpler to let their actions become your excuse. You had every reason to shut down, every reason to turn cold, distant, or numb. But you knew deep down that if you allowed yourself to live in reaction to what they did, they would still own part of you, and you were done being owned by anyone. So you chose the harder path, the quieter one, the lonelier one, the one no one claps for. You chose to grow. Responsibility doesn't mean excusing what happened. It doesn't mean accepting injustice or pretending that betrayal didn't leave a mark. What it means is that you refuse to let their choices determine your character. You realized that life did break you, but it also gave you the tools to rebuild, if you were willing to use them. And use them you did, slowly, carefully, with trembling hands. You laid brick by brick the version of yourself that no one could touch again. People who haven't carried real pain will never understand what it costs to keep your heart open after it's been shattered. They will never know how much strength it takes to be kind when cruelty would be easier, to forgive when vengeance feels justified, to stay soft in a world that taught you to harden. But you understood something deeper, that pain is not meant to be transmitted. It's meant to be and you did transform it. You didn't just survive, you grew. You didn't just make it out. You became wiser, clearer, more dangerous in your wisdom. And now, those who thought they had broken you can't even recognize the person you've become. Because the truth is, when you take responsibility for your suffering, you don't just heal, you evolve. You become someone even your past self wouldn't have believed possible. And that kind of growth, it shakes the ground beneath those who once tried to bury you. Silence is not surrender, it's strategy. People often misunderstand silence. They see someone go quiet after pain, and they interpret it as weakness, as if the absence of noise means the absence of strength, as if stillness equals surrender. But silence, when chosen consciously, is not defeat. It is strategy. It is the calm before the return, the space where internal reconstruction begins. It is where the most important battles are fought, not against others, but within oneself. When you went silent, they thought they had won. They saw your retreat as a retreat from life itself, a collapse. They didn't realize you weren't running away, you were going inward. You weren't vanishing, you were studying the ruins. You were learning the terrain of your pain, becoming familiar with every crack, every wound, every betrayal. You weren't ignoring the destruction, you were mapping it. And with each day of that quiet, you were beginning to rebuild from the inside out. Most people are terrified of silence because it forces them to confront the one voice they can't escape, their own. They avoid it with noise, with distractions, with drama. But you sat with it. You let the silence speak. And what it revealed to you was not fragility, but depth. Not despair, but potential. It showed you where your boundaries had been too thin, where your worth had been outsourced, where your energy had been spent on people who never saw you clearly. That period of silence was not passive. It was surgical. You were cutting ties with old patterns, uprooting false beliefs, letting go of borrowed identities, and no one could see it because healing, real healing, doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg for attention. It moves like water underground, slow, steady, and unstoppable. That's why they didn't notice your transformation. They were looking for noise, not noticing the quiet rebirth. You were listening not to them, but to something higher, to truth, to wisdom, to the subtle guidance that comes only when the world is shut out. You weren't plotting revenge, you were building clarity. And from that clarity came strength, not the kind that seeks to dominate, but the kind that cannot be dominated. You began to walk differently, think differently, carry yourself differently. And now they look at you and wonder what changed. They don't realize the answer isn't found in what you did. It's found in what you endured silently when no one was watching. People fear what they can't predict, and nothing is more unpredictable than a person who is healed in silence. Because that person no longer reacts the same way. They're not triggered. They're not easily manipulated. They've found something deeper than approval or attention. They've found alignment. And that alignment makes you untouchable in a way that's almost unsettling to those who once had power over you. Your silence was not the absence of power. It was the consolidation of it. It was your reset, your clearing ground, your return to self. And now that you've emerged from it, clearer, stronger, and rooted, those who once thought you were finished are left confused, disoriented, even haunted, because they realize too late the silence they mocked was actually the moment you became unstoppable. You didn't break in that silence. You were being remade. Moral reckoning comes through consequences, not revenge. There is a deep temptation that arises when someone has hurt you, the desire to make them feel what they made you feel, to show them the cost of their betrayal, to force them to understand what it took from you, the nights you couldn't sleep, the days you walked around with a hollowed-out chest, the version of yourself you lost just trying to survive what they did. It's a primal urge, and it's human. But if you act on it, you lose something sacred. Because justice, real justice, is not about retaliation, it's about consequence. And consequence doesn't need your intervention. It arrives on its own. You didn't seek revenge, even when you could have. You didn't expose them. You didn't try to destroy their name or sabotage their path. And that was not weakness. That was restraint. That was strength cloaked in silence. Because the highest form of power isn't striking back. It's having every reason to and choosing not to. That kind of discipline is rare. But it's what kept you clean. It's what preserved your integrity while they kept digging themselves deeper into patterns they refused to face. People who cause pain without accountability always assume they'll get away with it. They confuse silence with escape. But the truth is, every action casts a shadow. Every seed planted, whether it's love or betrayal, grows. And when you live long enough in avoidance, life eventually catches up. Not always with punishment, but with reflection, with stillness, with the undeniable weight of realizing that you were the one who ruined something real, that you took someone loyal and treated them like they were disposable. And now they're gone. Not bitter, not angry, just out of reach. That's the reckoning, and it's far more powerful than anything you could have orchestrated. You see, revenge operates on the idea that you need to show them, but moral consequence lets time do the work. You focused on healing, on becoming whole again, on returning to yourself without dragging them through the mud. And now, without a word, your existence reveals everything they tried to deny. You didn't have to scream, "You hurt me." Your growth shows it. You didn't have to say, "You lost someone valuable." Your absence teaches it. The world has a strange way of circling back, sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully clear. But truth has a rhythm. And when people live in contradiction to it, when they harm others and pretend it doesn't matter, they eventually come face to face with what they tried to escape. That moment doesn't come with drama. It comes in the quiet. When they realize they cannot find anyone who loved them the way you did, when they scroll through old messages and feel the sting of what they once had, when they encounter you again and see that you've outgrown the very version they tried to break. And make no mistake, that's justice. That's a moral reckoning. Not because you made it happen, but because they created it themselves. You simply allowed reality to unfold. That is the paradox of restraint. While they were busy denying, distracting, and blaming, you were transforming. You stayed in your lane. You rebuilt what was yours. And by doing so, you became the mirror they now cannot escape. A mirror that shows them what they lost. Not because you punished them, but because they punished themselves. You are not what they did to you. You are who you became despite it. There's a quiet kind of strength that comes from surviving what tried to ruin you. Not the kind you wear on your sleeve, not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that's etched into your character, into your decisions, into the way you move through the world, with your eyes a little sharper, your heart a little deeper, and your boundaries made of steel and wisdom. It's easy to believe, especially in the early stages of pain, that you've been reduced to what happened to you, that your identity is now tied to the betrayal, that your worth is somehow diminished because someone else failed to recognize it. But that is the first lie suffering tries to sell you, that you are now damaged goods. And for a while, maybe you believed that. Maybe you internalized their disregard. Maybe you thought that if you had been more lovable, more impressive, more accommodating, they wouldn't have left. They wouldn't have used you. They wouldn't have hurt you. But the truth is, their actions had far more to do with them than they ever did with you. You didn't deserve the pain, but what you did deserve was the chance to redefine yourself after it. And that's exactly what you did. You refused to let their choices become the lens through which you saw your own reflection. You refused to stay frozen in the moment where they dropped you. You got up, not quickly, not dramatically, but deliberately. Piece by piece, you reclaimed yourself. And the beauty of that kind of reclamation is that it doesn't just restore you to who you were before. It makes you into someone entirely new, someone forged in the fire, someone who doesn't flinch anymore when the ground shakes, someone who knows their worth not because others validate it, but because they fought to find it again. You became the lesson they never saw coming. The very thing they thought would destroy you became your origin story, your turning point, the moment your strength stopped being hypothetical and became real. Because here's the thing about transformation, it's almost never visible in real time. It's slow, it's boring, it's uncomfortable. It often looks like confusion and detachment and solitude. It looks like not answering texts, like questioning your past, like wondering if you'll ever trust again. And while others mistake that for weakness, what's really happening is alchemical. You are becoming unfamiliar to your former self. You are shedding the layers that once tolerated the intolerable. And that process, it's sacred. There were parts of you that had to die for the stronger version to be born. The people pleaser, the over-apologizer, the one who lowered their voice, shrank their needs, softened their boundaries just to be kept. You buried those parts with reverence, and in their place you planted truth, self-respect, discernment, the ability to walk away without needing to be understood. And now you live differently. You're not harder. You're wiser. You're not bitter. You're selective. You're not closed off. You're just no longer available for anything that costs your peace or dignity. And those who once held power over you, they no longer recognize you, because the version of you that tolerated their chaos no longer exists. That is what scares them. They don't miss you. They miss access to the unhealed version of you, the one who would bend to be loved, the one who would explain themselves endlessly, the one who kept giving even when it was never reciprocated. But now you walk with a different rhythm, a different presence. You've become rooted, centered, grounded. You speak more slowly. You take up space without apology. And you no longer perform for love, you choose where to give it. You didn't need to get even, you needed to get free. And in getting free, you've revealed a truth that most people never understand until it's too late, that what's done in darkness always finds its way to light, that losing someone loyal because of your own selfishness is a kind of pain that lingers far longer than anyone admits. It echoes in the quiet. It shows up in the stillness, when they scroll through old memories and realize they'll never feel that kind of love again. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it no longer exists for them. That's not revenge, that's justice. And justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives in the form of your success, your peace, your refusal to shrink, your refusal to hate, your refusal to become what hurt you. You see, you didn't become them. You became someone stronger because of them. And that is the full circle moment they never expected. Because the final truth is this: you are not what they did to you. You are what you chose to become after they did it. And that version of you, the one standing here today, resilient and unwavering, that version is untouchable,